Many people who were just asking questions about mass immigration, border security and integration as the far right. Would young mothers and wives like Lucy Connolly be currently serving a 2.5-year prison sentence for what she said on social media in what was once the home of free speech? Is it patriotic to rewire our legal system around a two-tier policy that very nearly openly discriminated against a white, straight British majority while being more lenient towards minorities? A policy that was based on recommendations from none other than Labour Foreign Minister David Lammy. Is sacrificing equality before the law patriotic? Is it patriotic to stifle freedom of speech through a new definition of Islamophobia that's going to limit what we can and cannot say about the religion of Islam and its place within Western liberal democracy? Labour's adopted definition that may well end up being enshrined into UK law defines Islamophobia so widely that we shouldn't be surprised to see people getting arrested for engaging in a legitimate debate about Islamist extremism. And what about Labour's plan to drag us back into the European Union via the back door? How patriotic is that? Does that respect the vote of 17 million Brits to restore sovereignty to these islands while at the same time smashing our borders? No, I don't think the Labour Party is the party of patriotism, because a real patriotic leader is somebody who recognises a country is not really a country unless it has control of its own borders. We can only stop the migrant crisis by leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and overhauling the Human Rights Act. A true leader who understands the nation would preserve our ancient traditions of free speech and individual liberty. A patriotic leader respects his nation's sovereignty. Only when Sir Keir Starmer begins listening to the forgotten majority, the people who are fed up with this political class in Westminster, who have betrayed them time and time again on everything from mass immigration to free speech to economic prosperity, can Keir Starmer even begin to claim to be a patriotic leader. Now, as always, send your own views in, but I'm joined now by former Cabinet Minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, Geoff Hoon. Geoff Hoon, is Keir Starmer a patriotic leader?
Yes, he is. And I think you touched on some of the aspects of his patriotism, his commitment to freedom of speech, to democracy, and above all else to the rule of law. Those are characteristics of England, of Britain, of the United Kingdom that resound around the world, that people associate with this great country and its people. And Keir Starmer is an exemplar of those opportunities that those principles and values provide for the people of this country.
But Geoff Hoon, wherever I go in the world, Washington, Paris, Berlin, people are asking themselves the same question: what on earth is happening to the UK? And often those concerns are precisely about the erosion of free speech on these islands, from non-crime hate incidents, which, as we've seen this week, the police have admitted they don't even know if these things work, through to definitions of Islamophobia, through to an increasingly authoritarian police arriving at parents' doorsteps, arresting them because of what they've said in WhatsApp groups. I mean, the international image of the UK on these issues to do with free speech and free expression, it's not great, is it?
I don't find that when I travel very extensively, and frankly, I think you must be speaking to a very small minority of people. When I go to the United States...
Vice President J.D. Vance?
I've got lots of family in the United States, and they admire the United Kingdom's commitment to the rule of law, to freedom of speech, to our democracy. And certainly looking at the United States at the present time, that's something they admire even more than before. So I don't really accept what you're saying. All freedoms are a balance. They're a balance between the right, obviously, of people to free speech, but at the same time, those freedoms should not impact on other people. And therefore, it's a balance. And the balance is provided by our judges, by our legal system, by our commitment to the rule of law. And that's part of being patriotic in this country, because we are a country that upholds those values probably more than any other country in the world. Without being too nationalistic about it, I believe very strongly in those values, as does Keir Starmer.
When you look at the debate in this country over immigration, and you've got extensive experience in Labour governments, you were there during the era of Blair and Brown, does it not give you pause for thought when you look at the numbers of people coming into this country, when you look at the public opinion on that issue, where we've got, as YouGov showed this week, for the first time since records began, we've got basically half the country now thinking mass immigration has been bad for Britain. They've never had a number that high before. Only 19% of people think it's been mostly good for the country. Does it not worry you that actually this Labour government is fundamentally adrift from the public mood on immigration?
I don't believe that's the case at all, because whilst I share your concern about the numbers, as does the government, and the government is taking significant steps to deal with it. As all governments have done in recent years, this didn't just start less than 12 months ago with the election of a Labour government. This has been a problem for this country for very many years, particularly under the previous Conservative government. Now, I'm not making a political point when I say that. It is something that has to be tackled. And the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, I know, have that at the top of their to-do list. And they're working very hard to deal with illegal immigration.
What is Labour's plan currently for actually fixing our borders, Jeff Hume? Because here's my concern. Let me just lay it out for you. My concern is we're not even close to the summer months. And already this year, the numbers are up over 40% on the same time last year. They're up over 80% on the same time in 2023. My concern is this: the longer this crisis goes on, the more public trust in the system is going to collapse. And the more we're going to end up in a really quite dangerous, volatile environment where, to be frank, millions of people understandably conclude that nobody in government is in control of the borders. I mean, what is Labour's plan for actually getting their arms around this issue? Because if we don't get our arms around it as a country, I am actually really concerned about where we're going to end up.
I agree that there is a serious issue that has to be dealt with. It's not a serious issue that can just be dealt with, however, on the beaches of Kent or any other seaward-facing county in this country. It's a problem that begins thousands of miles away, with gangs who are exploiting very often innocent, quite often very poor people into handing over their life savings for the prospect of coming to the United Kingdom, or indeed to other European countries, because we actually at the end of a very long chain of criminal activity. And that's where the government is directing its efforts rightly, because by disrupting those criminal gangs, we will disrupt the means by which these poor people end up coming to the United Kingdom.
Well, let's see, indeed, if Labour's plan does make a difference. Thank you, Jeff Hume, for your time this evening. Let's turn to the panel. Henry Hill from Conservative Home. Labour, is it a patriotic party?
You'd hope that all parties would be patriotic, right? It's a bit sad when everyone's trying to claim it one or the other. In Sir Keir Starmer's case, I think he is after his fashion. I think it's a sort of slightly Britpoppery sort of patriotism, which is quite soft-edged. It doesn't aim to exclude anyone. It aims to be incredibly accessible. And the problem with that, noble as the instinct is that realistically, to have a coherent identity, it needs to not only describe what unites all of its members, but it needs to describe what distinguishes them from other people, not necessarily, not in a hateful or hierarchical fashion. And so this is the problem with British values, which is that you read a list of British values, the phrase only started being used in the late 90s. And you read a list of these values and you're like, would Sir Keir Starmer expect a progressively minded Frenchman, Kazakh, not to hold any of them? Of course not. And so you end up with a definition, with a Britishness, which has no edges. Yeah. But that's the problem.
But this is the problem with the celebration of diversity more generally, isn't it? In that if you're saying that the only thing that defines a nation is that that nation welcomes diversity, it is the same thing as saying that nation has no identity of its own that you should celebrate. And when I listen to Keir Starmer talk about diversity, about how wonderful it is, I never really hear him say, what is it that is distinctive and unique about our own identity, history and culture? Because it isn't just this universal liberal theme of fairness and tolerance. That doesn't really mean anything. What is it, particularly on today, St. George's Day, what is it that makes the English distinctive? Why should we be proud of Englishness? I've never really heard Keir Starmer point to that distinctive aspect of our identity.
And I think that's one of the real failings of this project, is that actually there's nothing about English culture, prose, poetry, architecture, art, that is not accessible to people who weren't necessarily born here 5 generations ago. But you do need that foundation. And the thing about British values is it allows you to call this country an integration success story because you haven't set a test. Whereas France, with a much thicker civic nationalism, they have an integration problem, but it means that they're actually trying to turn people into a coherent idea of a Frenchman.
Benjamin Butterworth, the Labour Party now suddenly claiming it is the patriotic party for the majority, celebrating St George's Day. It doesn't really get patriotism, does it?
I think it cares a lot about looking patriotic, and I actually, I mean, I know that every MP I know is very concerned about looking patriotic in these occasions, and I actually think Keir Starmer is somebody who has a better idea of Englishness than most politicians. As someone that grew up in Kent, that had working class parents, I think he's exposed to that kind of working class English tradition in a way that few politicians are, and so I think he. Do
you really believe that? The guy that
absolutely.
really was adamant that we should have a second referendum on Brexit, who really didn't understand the views and the opinions of the majority of people in this country that voted to leave the European Union, the guy that's imposed an extreme policy of mass immigration on this country, you think he understands the English working class?
Yeah, I do, because that's who he is. That's his background and that's his family.
I come from exactly that background. I do not know anybody who appears like Keir Starmer.
Well, the general election would argue differently, given lots of those areas. I mean, the swing at the election, the biggest swing was among white Brexit voters. So that suggests that they saw something in him that they related to. But aside from the sort of party political points which Geoff Hoon arguably made, I would say that we kind of exist in an era for Britain in particular, where we're not sure what our role in the world is. You know, the colonies have gone in the last century and the Queen filled that vacuum effectively, but now she's gone. And I think we do have a more broad identity crisis. And also, the question of the nation state has never been weaker, because in a globalised economy, we see it with the effect of Donald Trump on the US on the UK in recent months is unlike what we've been used to in decades before, the extent of the power. The way in which other countries' behaviours, like France with the migrant crisis, can affect us. I think we live in a situation where the nation state doesn't hold together like it has before, and our culture is heavily affected by other countries.
Just briefly, Henry Hill, there is a point here as to we are no longer really sure about our national story.
Sure. But part of that is because we don't teach it anymore, right? The idea that educators disparage having a canon, right? Because it's arbitrary. But the point is, if everyone knows roughly the same historical figures, dates, poets, it's a point of common ground. And the fact that we don't tell that story anymore is why nobody knows it and picks their own.
Well, indeed. Well, we'll be carrying on this debate after the break amidst the leaked recording of Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick. We're going to be debating something in contemporary politics as to whether it is time for a Tory-Reform party pact. We're going to be talking about that with key party insiders in just a couple of minutes. Stay right there.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You know, has Britain just got so addicted to DEI everything? I mean, you know, as you said, merit. I mean, I believe in meritocracy. You know, I don't think anyone would want to be told you got a job over someone else because of your skin colour or your ethnicity or your religion. But are we just addicted to this now, Charlotte? What's going on here? We've seen these stories every week.
I think you're so right. I think there's been a habitual pattern, especially, it is always government organisations or the police or NHS particularly, isn't it? And it's just become so ingrained now in society that I think when somebody puts together a job spec, they can't help but include this. It's just because they're afraid not to, perhaps, or it's just become completely de rigueur. And, you know, actually, I think the time has come to think, you know, people have to be employed in merit. As you say, it would be horrible to get a job and think I've just been employed because of my skin colour. And the other thing that I have a bit of a bugbear about with the NHS is, because I've had 3 children and I've been to many a maternity ward and waiting line, and it's fine to wait in line, but if you are non-English speaking and you need a translator, they put you to the front of the queue as well there. And that creates so many problems, because I've seen literally, you know, pregnant mums sort of scrapping about this.
Most of us use NHS services. We see very diverse faces, and we just want to be served by the person who's going to look after us the most. Is this evidence here, these NHS documents with American, you know, DEI policies, just proof that we're taking too much over from America?
Yeah, I do think it's an NHS thing because, as we know, the NHS is completely bureaucratic beyond belief. And of course, any opportunity to create another tick box exercise or another layer of paperwork you have to get through, you know, they just seem to jump at the chance.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. You've been sending in your views about whether the Labour Party is as proud of the nation as everybody else. Julie says Labour are about as patriotic as they are economically competent, which is to say, not at all. Mark says in the late 1970s, a third of Labour MPs came from working class backgrounds. Now, fewer than 1 in 10. That is the problem. And Ben says, sorry, but every single member of the cabinet backed the EU over British independence and all campaigned to overturn the view of the British people. Keep your views coming in, as always. Now, in a bombshell leaked audio recording released today, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick said that he wants the right to be united, raising serious questions about a possible Conservative reform pact ahead of the...
I want the right to be united. And so one way or another, I'm determined to do that, and to bring this coalition together and make sure that we make solutions.
Now, it's the boldest indication yet from a senior Conservative frontbencher that a coalition with Reform UK might be on the table. Reform has been trouncing the Tories in the opinion polls since the start of the year and now claims to have overtaken the last known Conservative membership figures by some way, I should add. Kenny Badenoch and Nigel Farage have both ruled out a deal for now. But is that door really shut? With me now is my top panel, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and journalist Benjamin Butterworth. Benjamin, a pact between Reform and the Conservative Party, does it actually make sense electorally and philosophically?
Well, I think the comments actually reveal more about the disunity of the Conservative Party than the potential unity of the Conservative Party and Reform UK. I would say that, you know, there are lots of Labour voters, the kind of Labour voters that are going to Reform, that are instinctively put off by the Conservative Party. They probably took a punt in some cases in 2019, and their regret for that will be very fresh in their mind. And so I think the chances electorally of this really working out, I think, you know, you'd have a much stronger right-wing vote by the two separate parties.
I mean, just briefly on that, if I can.
Yeah.
I mean, Robert Jenrick is assuming, you know, he at some point is going to be the sort of master of ceremonies organising this. But if you look at the national opinion polls, Reform are leading. So surely this is Nigel Farage's decision, not Robert Jenrick's.
Well, I think that there's no way it's going to happen. That's the first thing to say. There's no way that Conservative MPs would tolerate a pact with... I mean, Henry can elaborate on that more. But I think there's no chance of that happening. Kenny Badenoch's ruled it out and Nigel Farage has ruled it out. And that's the thing. I can't see why Nigel Farage would want to do it because actually he has so much potential in those red wall seats, in those Labour voters. I think he is far more tempting than if they were combined with the Conservative Party.
Hold that thought, and before I come to Henry Hill to hear about what Conservative MPs are saying, watch this clip about Nigel Farage reacting to this story.
I agree with him. I think my supporters would be revolted.
His point is, I want to unite the right to get your policies, broadly your policies, with the Tories into power and keep Labour out. Are you willing to sacrifice that?
I would only do a deal with people who I could trust. I don't trust them.
Well, there you are, Henry Hill. He does not trust the Tories, therefore no deal with the Tories.
It doesn't really make sense for Reform. You can see how if we got right to the election, there's always gets tempting to sort of go slow, have an unofficial agreement, basically divvy up your target seats a little bit. But a formal pact, it hurts both parties. Reform are pitching in nearly all of their second places are Labour seats. I think only 9 of their seats are Conservative held. So why would they basically make themselves the local franchise of the party that those seats booted out 5 years ago. And for the Conservatives, they not only, nearly all their attack seats are Labour-facing or Lib Dem-facing, and they've got to be worried about getting sniped by the Lib Dems or the Greens in certain seats. Why would they want to be associated with Nigel Farage when they're pitching fundamentally at their kind of old ABC1 core vote?
I mean, I've looked at the Reform Party's most favourable seats in the country, and of the top 100, 2/3 are Labour held. And the moment they do a pact with the Conservative Party, they basically nuke all of those areas in the Red Wall and Wales and the northeast of England, where voters would obviously think, well, why would I ever now vote Reform if that means by proxy I'm voting for the Tories?
Exactly. The challenge is, if you imagine a Venn diagram, the overlap between the Tories and Reform is actually what their vote would be if they combined, which is smaller than the two circles separately. So you just have to hope that the advantage in individual seats was enough. But especially for Reform, if they're ahead, and there will be a lot of Tory voters who'll probably switch to them anyway as the right-wing option. The Conservatives have a bigger problem in that regard.
I mean, looking at PMQs today, Benjamin Butterworth, we saw Keir Starmer quite enthusiastic about the idea of a deal, which should tell you something, because I think Labour would see this as a way of basically stigmatising both parties by saying, well, if you vote for Farage, you're voting for the Tories. If you vote for the Tories, you're voting for Farage. And so suddenly the Labour Party is more enthusiastic about this deal than Nigel Farage's.
Well, yeah, I mean, that probably goes back to what you said. Labour's line for the past few weeks has been that this is getting the Tories through the back door, and they think that will be effective because they know that's far more toxic. But there is a reverse way to look at this, which is that when you have the electoral maths that we have now of a three-horse race, that arguably benefits the Labour Party because the chances are that those seats won't fall in the preferable order, and Labour will get in, as Kemi Badenoch has said, by a consequence of the chaos on the other side. And so, I think that's plausible, but I support first past the post. But actually, you do get a slightly farcical situation now where if you've got three parties competing in most parliamentary seats, and then you've got the Greens and Lib Dems in a considerable number afterwards, when you've got five parties on 20%, it almost becomes luck of the draw who gets elected.
I mean, Henry Hill, the one word we've not mentioned is philosophy. I mean, we're assuming these two parties are identical, but actually they've got fundamental differences in their governing philosophy. I mean, the Conservatives have basically embraced large-scale migration. Reform are completely opposed to that. Conservatives won't commit to leaving the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. Reform will do that. I mean, there are big philosophical differences between these two parties that basically hinge on this definition of what is conservatism today. And I think, Reform are a bit like Trump in that they're trying to redefine the right, and the Conservatives are sort of clinging to this outdated conception of what the right and what conservatism really is.
I think you're maybe doing them both the courtesy of assuming that they have philosophies. They've got vibes, but they're both very divided parties. The Conservative Party's divides, we already know about. But if you look at Reform have an awful lot of Thatcherite ex-Conservatives who are fundamentally free marketeers. Some, but
most of them were backing nationalisation of steel.
Sure, but how many is them, right? The Conservative Party has a large parliamentary ish, historically not, but and so. But Nigel Farage is one man, and then there's a relatively small cadre of people around him. But then you see this people they select. Recently, I think they selected a candidate who believes in reparations for slavery. Basically, I think there is a tension there. Reform is currently in the position the Lib Dems are always in, right? It's very easy to say you want zero immigration when you're a very long way from power. But you haven't heard from Reform is how would you transition the economy, right? What would you do about those sectors which currently rely on that labour? They haven't done the work. I think the real challenge would not actually be before the election. It would be after the election. If the Tories and Reform managed between them to get enough seats to turf out Labour, can Nigel Farage or Robert Jenrick or whoever is leading the Conservative Party, I think then they have a much harder question because they would have to choose to keep a Labour government in office.
Well, thank you to my panel for some really interesting insight as always. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be asking a former immigration minister why the betrayal of the British people on mass immigration has destroyed public trust in the system. You don't want to miss this interview. Join me in a couple of minutes.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast. It's quite a mixed picture across southern Europe as we go through the next couple of days. Western parts mostly dry, but in the east we have some heavy, thundery rain. There's the risk of frequent lightning, some large hail, gusty winds, and rainfall totals of around 50 to 75 millimetres in just a few hours could cause some flooding. Like I said, though, further west, a lot of dry weather, and here it is going to stay mostly fine as we go through the next couple of days. In fact, across the Canary Islands, we're going to see our temperatures rising into the high 20s.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Westminster, the ultimate clique. And you're fighting like rats in a sack. But here on the Camilla Tominey Show, we ask the questions the establishment media is too scared to ask. OK, let me ask you a straight question, because I know you're a straight-talking politician. Whether it's net zero, illegal immigration or law and order, nothing is off limits. You had the power then.
Yeah, as I
and
say,
now you've lost it. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show that's fearless. But no, let me finish my question if you don't mind, because it is my show. Sundays at 9:30, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience, because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, the government has finally succumbed to demands to publish a Migrant Crime League table. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has ordered the Home Office to publish the data, which until now has been hidden from you, the British people, British taxpayers, and it's expected to come out later this year. But the fact that it took so long points to the wider breakdown of trust on this issue. It seems that whether voters vote for more or less immigration, they always get more. The latest YouGov polling shows that now a record proportion of people, about half the country, think that immigration has been bad for Britain. Well, to discuss all of this and the latest data release and perhaps what more data we need from the state and from government, I'm joined by Kevin Foster, former Immigration Minister. Kevin, a step in the right direction for many people in the country today. Yvette Cooper, the Home Office, finally conceding that we need to get data on crimes that are committed by foreign nationals who are awaiting deportation. But it begs the obvious question, why was this data being hidden from people to begin with?
Well, Matt, look, it's welcome that this is
being published, and we've seen other European countries publish data, and it's actually revealed some quite interesting statistics that rather than lumping all migrants together and saying a potential, for example, in Finland, a slightly higher crime rate, actually, when you dig into the data, you see some groups have a much higher crime rate. Actually, some, and I think Ukrainian refugees was their example, are very similar to their home nationals. So it's welcome that this is coming out. Is it something that should have been done previously? Possibly. Certainly something that was been called for over the last about 2-3 years. And look, there are those arguing against this, say this might present real challenges. Well, OK, but let's have those debates publicly. Let's see what the data tells us and have an informed debate on our migration system.
I have found it rather amusing today on X, watching people like James O'Brien and Ian Dale suggesting that actually releasing this data might be, in their words, divisive, that it might actually cause division in British society. Whereas I thought that actually giving voters data, giving voters transparency, giving voters information, was really important, because you can't accuse voters of suffering from misinformation or disinformation while refusing to give them information on these crucial issues.
Absolutely, Matt. Misinformation thrives in the absence of the truth. And if people think there's going to be uncomfortable facts released, then let's talk about what those are in an open format. And as I said, there will be migrant groups that actually have a lower crime rate than UK nationals. And let's discuss why that is, in the way that I think UK nationals in, I think it was Denmark or Finland, turn out they actually have a lower crime rate than the domestic citizens. So, when we're overseas, there are countries where we have a lower crime rate, and that's provoked useful debates about what is it about particular groups, what is it about integration. And we already publish a lot of statistics around things like ethnicity and religion. So this actually just complements that as well, providing a distinction between just assuming, for the sake of argument, every Sikh is someone who was born abroad. Well, that's clearly not the case now. So I think I really can't understand why they would object. And I think this gives people information. And if you're uncomfortable about the information, then you need to ask yourself, why is that the case, and what can we do about it?
Indeed. Kevin, just briefly, if I may, we're also seeing in the polling quite a sea change in public opinion around immigration. Public opposition has never been as high as it is this week, according to YouGov. Only 19% think mass immigration has been good for Britain. The decisions of both the Conservatives and the Labour governments over the last 2 decades have basically alienated and angered much of the country. So is this a watershed moment now? Are we actually going to get politicians who understand that the vast majority of people in this country do not support the extreme policy of mass immigration?
I think what we see is, and it was interesting to look at the graph of how YouGov's tracked opinion over time. Until about 3-4 years ago, it was fairly mixed views. There were, you couldn't distinguish a particular view the whole public was taking. But as you say, now the polling is emphatic that most people, by quite some distance, believe migration has been bad for this country. And I mean, a lot of that can be tracked around things like small boat issues. People are seeing hotels being filled in their community that they're paying for, hearing that it's costing millions of pounds a day, whilst at the same time then hearing about problems finding accommodation and finding a home for, let's say, those under 30 who haven't got a mum or dad who can buy them a house. So I think that is the sort of thing that has really damaged people's trust and confidence. The Conservative Party's got to take it on the chin that pledging to stop the boats, and they're not really having a particularly great strategy to do so. And then hearing Labour, we're going to smash the gangs, great slogan, not much of a strategy. So yes, people will be wanting to see, certainly by the time we get to the next election, but well before then as well, who has got an actual plan, not just a statement. Because it's easy to say you'd drop migration to zero or you'd seriously reduce it, but how do you support those sectors that rely on it? What's your training programme for nurses and doctors for the NHS? If we're going to meet the demand domestically, how are you going to deal with that?
Thank you, Kevin Foster, for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. Let's just turn back to my panel for a moment. Benjamin Butterworth, one of the curious things, as I say, that I saw today were many people on the left of British politics objecting to the release of data and information. I've campaigned for this data for years. They're saying that actually this is going to be divisive, that if we tell people what's really going on in the country with regard to crime and the crimes that are committed by migrants and people who are awaiting deportation. This might inflame community tensions. What do you think about that?
Well, as a journalist, I'm not against it because, the more information and transparency you can have, the better.
Did you believe in truth?
But here's the question. I think Yvette Cooper has done this because of politics, not because of policy. So the question is, once this information is in the public domain and once the Home Secretary has it, because it's not currently collated in this way, what can you do with that? Does it mean that if Afghan migrants have a much higher rate of crimes, which I think it probably will show...
We don't let people from Afghanistan
But should that affect an individual who has come here and
yeah, but it should
would be
affect our
approved
migration
asylum?
policy like it does in other parts of Europe, where they say, for example, in the UK, as we know, through freedom of information requests, people from Afghanistan are about 20 times more likely than Brits to commit serious sexual assaults. So we should take that information into the Home Office and elsewhere and say we should reshape our immigration policy so we are not taking people from countries who are disproportionately more likely to commit crime.
I think the idea that an Afghan who, for example, worked with Allied forces to help us as an interpreter and comes over here shouldn't face the burden of the actions of people that have behaved in that way who are here. I don't think that would be fair and reasonable. But then there is another side to this, which is that Albanians were the main nationality coming over in boats, and that's because they control a lot of the illegal drugs and sex trade in Britain, and clearly there was a link between why they were coming in that way rather than as economic migrants.
I remember the Albanian Prime Minister telling us that Albanians were not disproportionately more likely to commit crime. Henry Hill, what do you make of this sea change of public opinion around migration? And also, do you think the release of this data is going to help restore trust?
Well, it was interesting hearing Kevin shifting the question onto small boats when actually if you had to pick one thing that is responsible in the last 4 years, it would be the Boris wave, right? And we're actually talking about legal migration here rather than illegal migration. The challenge with this, and it is interesting seeing actually with the British state how much data it has stopped collecting over the past 20 years, because a lot of this granular data on all kinds of issues, used to exist in one form or another, and then so the bits of the civil service or parliament have just stopped collecting it. So this is a step forwards. There's obviously much more you could do. Denmark, for example, I think also connects lifetime net contributions to the exchequer. But the question is, what do you do with it? Now, one example, the spousal visa requirements, which the Conservatives kicked up a fuss about last year. The reason those were so high in the first place is because there was a real problem from, I think, 4 to 6 countries with fraudulent visas. But we couldn't, for whatever reason, have a policy that targeted people coming from those 6 countries because it wouldn't be fair to them as individuals. And so instead we had to implement a blanket rule for everyone, which was hugely more cumbersome. And so I do think that we need to be looking, as you say, at just using this data because it's impossible to get enough individual level information to make good decisions all the time.
Well, as I say, I'm absolutely sick and tired of voters, of the British people being accused of misinformation while the state hides information from them. It's absolutely outrageous. Thank you to my panel. Now, in just a moment, we're going to be exposing the deep state with the founder of a new campaign to uncover all of the waste that we, you, the taxpayers, are paying for. I'm going to be asking him, is it now finally time for a UK Doge? And just how much money is being wasted on these quangos? See you in a couple of minutes.
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather update from the Met Office. There will still be a few lingering showers for a little while yet, but most places will turn dry overnight, and with some clear skies in the west, it will turn a bit chilly for some. Currently, we have high pressure to the north and to the south, and low pressure both to the east and the west. As a result, we're in something called a col, under which our weather is going to settle down, and so we're seeing most of those showers dying out and clearing away. That being said, there will be quite a bit of cloud overnight across eastern and some southern parts, and this cloud could bring a few spots of rain as well. But under some clearer skies, particularly towards the west, things are going to turn a little chilly. Some prone spots may see a touch of frost, and there could be a few patches of mist and fog developing too. But as we start tomorrow morning then, a fairly cloudy story across many southern areas, perhaps a few glimmers of brightness across Devon and Somerset, and also some parts of Wales. There should be some sunny spells, decent amount of sunny spells across Northern Ireland, northwest England and central and western Scotland, but the further east you are, the greater chance you have of those cloudy skies, and with that the greater chance of a few spots of rain, but nothing especially heavy. Now, as we go through the day, through the morning into the afternoon, I am expecting some of this cloud to break up and burn away a little bit, but it is going to linger in a few places, so it is going to stay quite grey for some areas, particularly across central central southern England, some eastern parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, a bit of sunshine developing, and if you get this sunshine, well, it's not going to feel too bad. Temperatures peaking in the mid to high teens Celsius. But we have some cloudy, wet and blustery weather pushing in from the west later on, and this is going to affect particularly Northern Ireland as we go through Friday, but also fringing into western Scotland and maybe western parts of England and Wales. Further east, a fine day, plenty of decent sunny weather on offer, and that's the case through this weekend. Towards the northwest, there will be some rain at times, drier towards the southeast and warm too.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, here's a word, Quangos, quasi-non-governmental organisations, otherwise known as those deep state, unelected, unaccountable bodies operating quietly in the background, which are costing you billions of pounds every year. These organisations, Quangos, sound harmless enough, but in reality, they are arms of government power handed to bureaucrats who have no democratic mandate from you, the British people. There are now over 300 of these things across the UK, and they are draining some £350 billion from taxpayers without a shred of public oversight. Sir Keir Starmer promised a bonfire of the Quangos, just like governments before him. But what has he done since taking office? Well, he's set up more than 20 new ones. The Taxpayers Alliance has had enough, an important campaign group here in Westminster. They've launched a new campaign, Britain's Campaigns Uncovered, on X today. Watch this.
The body is spending taxpayers' money and shaping national policy. The public deserves to know who they are, what they're doing, how they got there, and whether they deserve a penny of their money. So let's pull back the curtain, expose Britain's Quangos, and put decision-making back where it belongs.
Well, with me now is the man in that video, William Yarwood, Media Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, William, I would not only like to know who does your social media, but more importantly, what do people out there need to know about the Quangocracy that is emerging around us?
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, I actually did that video all by myself, would you believe it? Which is quite fun. And I've really enjoyed the response from it because this is such an important issue. What people don't need to know is that, as you said earlier, we at the TPA have had enough of the guff and the lies and the nonsense coming from the politicians about who governs Britain, basically. Because the real answer about who governs Britain is it's not the politicians currently sitting in the House of Commons. It's people in backroom offices, in Quangos, like you said, which are making the real decisions which British people care about. And just recently, we've released our first report in our first campaign, Britain's Quangos Uncovered, called Members of the Board, which highlights just how many Quangocrats there are in this country. So I'll just rattle some stats off for you. There are 285 Quangocrats who sit on more than one Quango body, and overall there are 4,605 Quangocrats who sit on not over 300, but almost 400 Quango boards. And the issue is, we don't know what they do. We don't really know how much they cost us. We don't know what their sort of function in society is. And the TPA is here to basically pull back the veil and tell us, you know, how much are these guys costing? What do they do? And do they really need to exist in Britain today? Because the answer, I think, clearly for a lot of them is obviously no.
I remember about 20 years ago reading quite an influential book called Post-Democracy. And the thesis in it was basically that power, accountability, influence is being taken away from the people and being moved to these unelected, unaccountable bodies. And listening to you, it sort of strikes me that that's basically gone mainstream, that yes, we might have left the European Union, we might have reclaimed our national democracy to some extent, But in some sense, power is still being hoarded by these entities that are not accountable to the people.
Yes, absolutely. So the Cabinet Office supposedly has oversight over these groups. But the issue is the governance laws and the accountability laws that have been put in place are never, ever enforced, Matthew. Actually, there was a fantastic report by the Institute for Government recently, just a few years ago, which showed that actually the relationship between Quangos and the government is one of vagueness. One of complete vagueness. No one really knows who's on these boards, no one really knows what they're doing and the like, and they have no idea how it applies to the departments that those ministers are working in.
So what about Labour scrapping, for example, NHS England, the biggest Quango in the country? I mean, if Labour were here, they would say, hey, we are taking on the Quangos.
So why did they set up so many when they first came into power? That's my question, Matthew. I mean, I don't buy Labour's colour of the Quangos at all. Not only have we heard it all before from the Tories, I mean, when the Tories were in power, they claimed to do a bonfire of Quangos, but actually 5 out of 6 Quangocrats ended up keeping their jobs due to reshuffles and smaller Quangos being morphed into bigger ones. But the reason I don't buy Labour's Quangocracy bonfire specifically is not just because they've set up loads of ones, so GB Energy, which is not going to raise any energy, the Office of Value for Money, which is not going to, save any money, and the National Wealth Fund, which is not going to, raise any wealth. The reason I don't really buy it is because it's part of Keir Starmer's governing philosophy. He thinks that actually expertise, bureaucrats, so on and so forth, they know what's best for Britain. Not actually the British people themselves, or the representatives they elect.
And this is what I'm quite interested in. There are two different conceptions of power in the country. There is a conception of elite power. I think Keir Starmer probably shares this, that basically it is the expert class who should be deciding where we go as a country. And then there is a more direct democratic conception of power, which is about power resting in the people. And they are two fundamentally different visions of democracy.
Absolutely, and the problem with a lot of this Quangocracy is it's so far away from democratic oversight. I mentioned earlier about the Cabinet Office having some level of oversight over it, but when ministers are dealing with various policy issues, they're not able to understand or deal with the Quangos that their department supposedly has coverage over. I mean, there's so many Quangos in this country, like I said, there's over 400, and what the TPA's plan is basically, Matthew, is to reveal absolutely every single one, name the names and break down the budgets, because we're frankly sick to death of actually this country not working, power not being where it should be, which is with the democratically elected politicians that our people elect, and actually understand where on earth the power lies and why it should be in the hands of the people we actually elect, because democratic accountability and transparency, you were saying earlier about migration statistics, such an important move for transparency, but this is the next step. We need transparency in our governance laws, because otherwise we're not going to know who governs Britain or why.
Well, thank you, William. I'm going to be watching that project very closely because I think Quangocracy is a real problem. Now, up next tonight is Patrick Christis. Patrick, what have you got on your show this evening?
Great show, Matt. Thank you very much. Well, I expose a huge problem in British schools. Militant pro-Palestine teachers led by Marxist unionists. Should they all be struck off? British war veterans thrown to the wolves by Labour whilst the IRA walk free. We look at that. On that note, Keir Starmer's pathetic attempt at patriotism. This guy has surrounded himself with people who've been on the side of Britain's enemies for years, and now he expects us to believe that he's all about the flag of St. George. Immigration judge. Now, they, when they're not being an immigration judge, work as a barrister for illegal immigrants. How on earth can that be allowed to happen? And I'll be speaking live to 2 Australian twins who've become international media sensations, because all of that comes your way after your weather.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather update from the Met Office. There will still be a few lingering showers for a little while yet, but most places will turn dry overnight, and with some clear skies in the west, it will turn a bit chilly for some. Currently, we have high pressure to the north and to the south, and low pressure both to the east and the west. As a result, we're in something called a col, under which our weather is going to settle down, and so we're seeing most of those showers dying out and clearing away. That being said, there will be quite a bit of cloud overnight across eastern and some southern parts, and this cloud could bring a few spots of rain as well. But under some clearer skies, particularly towards the west, things are going to turn a little chilly. Some prone spots may see a touch of frost, and there could be a few patches of mist and fog developing too. But as we start tomorrow morning then, a fairly cloudy story across many southern areas, perhaps a few glimmers of brightness across Devon and Somerset, and also some parts of Wales. There should be some sunny spells, decent amount of sunny spells across Northern Ireland, northwest England and central and western Scotland, but the further east you are, the greater chance you have of those cloudy skies, and with that, the greater chance of a few spots of rain, but nothing especially heavy. Now, as we go through the day, through the morning into the afternoon, I am expecting some of this cloud to break up and burn away a little bit, but it is going to linger in a few places, so it is going to stay quite grey for some areas, particularly across central southern England, some eastern parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, a bit of sunshine developing, and if you get this sunshine, well, it's not going to feel too bad. Temperatures peaking in the mid to high teens.